Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another AFC Choice Chat. I'm your host, John Patton. I'm the director, the state director here in Tennessee, and I'm very pleased today to welcome Senator Mike Bell with us today to talk a little bit about education and a little bit about his role in the legislature. And so, welcome, Senator Bell.
Hey, thank you, John. Glad to be here this morning.
We recently awarded Chairman Bell with our annual Champion of Choice Award for standing strong with us year after year on the issue of school choice. And he is retiring from the seat this year. And while we're sad to see him go from the legislature, we're excited for him in the next phase of life and definitely excited to chat today. So Chairman Bell, I'd love to hear a little bit about what your district and the area and the region of the state that you represent, and what are some of your roles in legislature committees and things like that?
Sure. Well, John, I appreciate it. John, I represent the southeast corner of the state. In fact, I like to tell people that literally I've got the corner. My district borders Georgia and North Carolina. So I've got two counties that border Georgia, Polk and Bradley, and two that border North Carolina, Polk and Monroe County. Beautiful district geographically. I've got mountains and valleys. Tennessee River runs through my district, and it's just you ask any legislator where he lives, he's going to tell you he lives in the most beautiful part of Tennessee, and I do.
Yeah, right.
I was born and raised there. In fact, I've never lived more than 20 miles from the hospital I was born in, and I'll be 59 next month. And my wife, who is a couple of years behind me in age, she's never lived more than 20 miles from the hospital she was born in. So we were both born in the same hospital and have never moved from that area. Families kept me there and work. And again, I just think it's a beautiful part of the state. John, since my time in the legislature, I actually started out in the House back in 2006. Going through the committees I've served on, I've served on a committee that I think is gone now. It used to be called Consumer and Employee Affairs in the House. And then another committee that is gone, it was called Children and Families Committee, that just focused on issues dealing with children and families. I chaired my first subcommittee during that time in the House, and it was a subcommittee of the Children and Families Committee. And then I also served on the Ag Committee in the House and the Government Operations Committee. And then when I came to the Senate, I continued to serve on the Government Operations Committee. I've been on that committee now 16 years. I served on the Ag Committee in the House, which is called Energy, Ag, and Environment. In the Senate. I served on the Ag Committee in the Senate, which is called Energy, Ag, and Environment. And then I started serving on the Judiciary Committee in 2010 as well. And I've been on that committee now for 12 years, going on my 12th year. I chaired the Government Operations Committee for 7 years in the Senate, and then became chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee 3 years ago. And I'm going into my 4th year as chair of that committee.
Okay.
Oh, and I'm sorry. And then I got the one committee I left out, what we're talking about today. I started on the Education Committee 4 years ago, and we'll be concluding my 4th year on that committee this year. Okay.
So you've touched a lot of different areas. Your experience is broad and deep.
It is broad. Well, I'll put it that way, for sure.
When you decided to run in 2006, what was, if you kind of had to break it down to one or two core reasons, what really drew you to that, to public service?
As you and I go through this conversation, you're going to hear a recurring theme, and it is what got me started back in 2006. And that is protecting parental choice in education. My wife and I have 5 children. We homeschooled all five of those children, and parental choice in education is what drew me to the legislature. When I started coming up here in the mid 90s, I guess it's the first time I started coming to the legislature, when they would have issues dealing with home education and parental choice. We used to have what was called a rally day when we'd come up here as home educators in the state to meet with our legislators and tell them what was important to us. So that issue, and also the issue of protecting unborn life. There was a constitutional amendment called SJR 127 that many in the legislature worked to pass for a number of years. We didn't get it passed until 2009, I believe. But when I got elected in 2006, that was another big issue on my radar, a reason that I wanted to run.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah, that definitely does relate to our discussion today.
Yeah.
What are you most, I guess, what are you most proud of when you think about your time in the House or the Senate? What are you most proud of in terms of kind of what you've been able to accomplish?
Well, John, in general, it's been protecting the rights of parents to do as they see fit, as they feel God has called them to do in educating their children. I'm going to go back to something I took somewhat of an unusual route to the legislature. You'll see if you come up here on any week during session, you'll see legislators you'll see lobbyists who are former legislators who are now up here lobbying. I actually was a paid lobbyist prior to getting elected to the legislature. When I say paid, I was getting paid $120 a day by the Homeschool Association to come up here and represent home educators. And I did that for 3 years prior to running for office. And back in 2002, the people of the state of Tennessee passed a constitutional amendment creating the lottery, and then the legislature then created the Hope Scholarship on top of the lottery that any student can get if they meet certain basic criteria in grades or an ACT or SAT score. Well, in 2003, again, I wasn't a member of the legislature, but I was up here working for homeschoolers. In 2003, Tennessee passed the first Hope Scholarship law to define the Hope Scholarship. And Tennessee became the first state in the nation to allow homeschoolers to get the Hope Scholarship. There were about, I think, a dozen states that had a lottery funded scholarship, but none of them allowed home educators or students who had been home educated to get the scholarship. And I worked on that. I worked with the legislature. I lobbied that issue, I guess you would say. And Tennessee became the first state in the nation to do that.
Well, that's amazing. I did not know that history. And when you were up there lobbying, you were lobbying for my parents, because I'm one of 9 kids, and my parents homeschooled. Not all of us all the way through, but they homeschooled all 9 of us for some period of time. So I was homeschooled up through 6th grade, and so that's a pretty amazing history. I did not know that. Are there other states now that do permit?
Yes, many other states now allow homeschoolers to get the Hope Scholarship or a lottery scholarship. But at that time, Tennessee was first in the nation, and the sponsors of that bill were both Democrats. It was Steve Cohen, who's now a congressman from West Tennessee. He was a Senate sponsor, and I believe Kim McMillan, who represented Montgomery County at that time, was the House sponsor. And I remember going into their offices and talking to them about how important this was to be fair to all students in the state of Tennessee. If you met that same objective standard, which was at that time it was an ACT score for homeschoolers, they now can get the scholarship based on a GPA and dual enroll credit. But at that time it was just ACT, but at least that allowed us to have a foot in the door. So that was a big issue. Another big issue, John, I'll just mention, and I can't point to one particular bill because I've carried numerous bills on protecting and expanding the rights of citizens to carry weapons in the state of Tennessee. That's another issue that I focus on a lot since I've been in the legislature.
Yeah. Well, that's wonderful. It's really interesting, and I definitely I'm glad to hear Tennessee was a leader on the lottery scholarship kind of eligibility stuff. That's pretty amazing.
We were.
What's the hardest piece of legislation that you've ever passed or that you've ever worked on? The biggest fight, biggest.
I could mention several that I never got passed, and I would say they're the hardest because I've still never passed them. So I can think of several of those, but I'm going to mention one that if it was introduced today would be passed as an afterthought. You wouldn't even think about passing it. But when I introduced it back in 2007, my first year in office, it took me 3 years to get it passed, and every year coming back with the same bill and every year hitting the same objections. And this goes back to one of the issues I focus on, and that being weapons in the state of Tennessee.
Mhm.
At that time, now we talk about carrying weapons in restaurants or in parks or even in higher education, which I sponsored that bill several years ago that allows all of our employees of our state higher education facilities to carry weapons if they choose to. Well, this time it was just allowing people to carry a weapon into a wildlife management area. I'm talking forests and trees. You couldn't even carry your gun in
Oh,
there
wow.
unless you were hunting. But if you wanted to carry it for protection or for any other reason, you couldn't. When the bill had a $324 fiscal note. Now, if you ever look at the legislature, we deal with funding bills that have millions of dollars with fiscal notes. This one had a $324 fiscal note, and I couldn't get it passed. And because of the dynamics and the politics of the legislature at that time, and it took me 3 years of coming back every year with the same bill and saying, come on, pass this bill, fund $324 in a $20 billion budget. And it finally.
That's wild. You kind of on that point, and this relates a little bit to some of the education issue and some of maybe the differences between urban, suburban, and rural Tennesseans. But how have you gone about convincing? I know there's not that much urban landscape in the state of Tennessee, but maybe folks that have grown up in Davidson and Shelby that they never thought about owning a gun, and that it's just sort of a different mindset. Like how, in terms of protecting and expanding the liberties and making sure the Second Amendment is completely followed. How do you convince people?
Oh, and sometimes you don't convince them. You just have to pass it over their objections, because it's a different culture, and I'm not, good or bad. I'm not saying good or bad. It's just a different culture. I'll tell you, it's a lot. When I was upstairs, of course, upstairs means something to you and I because we were up there a few weeks ago. But who may be watching this wouldn't understand that we have a conference room above us up here. And when we met with all the charter school advocates, well, most of those were from urban areas.
Yeah.
Part of what we have to do in the legislature is I have to convince my suburban rural people how important these charter schools are to these parents in the urban areas. And so, while on weapons, it may be the rural people trying to convince the urban people, but on other issues, it's those who live in the urban areas of the states who benefit from something more proportionately, even though I would argue that all parents benefit from expanded choice, period.
Right.
But it seems to focus more in the urban areas than it does in the rural areas.
Yeah. Well, kind of continuing on the urban rural thing a little bit, and pivoting a little bit to a question specifically about homeschooling. In some other states, AFC is even currently running into some struggles with homeschooling parents and homeschooling advocates who are substantially against ESA's, education savings accounts, because of I think maybe the long-term threat of encroachment, that kind of thing on the curriculum, how they can use the dollars, whatever it might be. And I'm curious what, as somebody who's a very experienced homeschooling parent, what would you say to those concerns?
Yeah, and John, this is an interesting discussion. I've had it with many of my friends in the homeschool community here in the state of Tennessee. And of course, the homeschool movement in Tennessee the homeschooling did not become legal in Tennessee until 1985. There's a very interesting story that maybe at some time we can tell you about how that happened. It came from a court case that took place in the county that I lived in. But there are what I call homeschool purists. I grew up in the purist movement. Don't take anything from the government. Don't trust the government. I still lean toward don't trust the government, but don't be entangled with the government in any way.
Right.
But then there's a more modern homeschool movement that's grown up that's much more willing to work within the government structure. We've got many of our school districts in the state of Tennessee that reach out to the homeschool community and say, listen, do you need to take a math class? Come in here and get it from us. Do you need a biology lab? Come in here and get it from us. But the purists still believe that any government entanglement is a detriment to the movement. I'm for I'm for giving that parent the choice. If the parent wants to be a purist, the framework's out there for the parent to be a purist. If the
Right.
parent wants to take an ESA or wants to be involved with the local school district via athletic opportunity, which is another thing that I've worked on a lot since I've been up here, is allowing homeschoolers to participate in athletics, which they can do now. But if it be an athletic opportunity or taking a biology lab at the local high school that they just don't have the resources to do at home, I encourage them to do that. I'm while I understand the argument of my purist friends, I tell them that you can continue to be a purist within the framework of allowing another parent who would like to reach out for help, either through an ESA or some other type of resource that the public schools may have. And so I think philosophically, I'm for parental choice, regardless of whether I may take that choice myself.
Mm-hmm.
I may still lean more toward the purist idea and ideal of educating, but I'm for you, parent, if you choose to go another way. Again, I'm for expanding parental choice regardless.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So I guess the angle there is if you pass an ESA, then I mean, essentially a family that's a purist family, they don't have to accept the dollars,
That's right.
the ESA
That's
dollars. And I guess I mean, that's fairly straightforward. But again, yeah, I understand the impulse, the impulse to not trust potentially. But I mean, as you've been working on, I think the upside to passing something like ESAs for homeschooling pods, whatever it may be, the upside is so significant. I think that we've got to try it out. We've got to go that route.
Yep. And I'm there as well.
Yeah. Well, so since you've been driving up to Nashville from Riceville for, these however many years, 15, 16 years.
Right.
What are you most looking forward to after you move on from your seat?
Well, who knows? I mean, I'm moving on, not to retire. I'm not old enough to retire, and not independently wealthy, John. As much as I would like to retire, I could think of a lot of things I could do on my farm, either with cattle or other livestock, and I'm sure I can always find more time to go fishing and hunting and other things in the outdoors that I enjoy doing. But I am going to retire from the legislature and going to continue to work. So I'll probably I don't yet know what that'll be. I could be still somewhere within government. I could be in the private sector. So I still may be driving a lot. I still may be away from home some. I just don't know yet. But I've got my 7th grandchild on the way. Spent this last weekend with getting to see my grandchildren after not being home for 10 days, because last weekend I didn't go home like I normally do. I drove to Florida for my mom's 78th birthday and spent the weekend with her, and then came back. And so I got to spend some time with 6 of my grandchildren this last weekend. And again, I've got the 7th on the way, and I look forward to hopefully spending more time with them, but also just getting back out into the workforce somewhere. One of the things that is unique about our legislature, it's a good thing, I'm just saying it's unique, is that it is a part-time job. It's a part-time job with full-time responsibilities. And at my age, I need to think a little bit about where I'm going to be at retirement. And so I need to get away from here and bluntly make a little money before I get too old to work.
Yeah. Well, I do think that the average public, the general public, would be surprised if they were to Google and look up the pay for legislators. I mean, there's some great things about it. There's some wonderful components to it, but you guys don't do it to get rich. That's for sure.
That's right.
And
that's right.
But we appreciate your service, and I very much personally appreciate living 20 miles from the hospital you were born in, being that rooted in a community in the county, and it's so increasingly rare these days. And I think that makes you the type of person that I'm really thankful has been on the Hill for these last 15, 16 years, because your faith, your rootedness, those are the kind of people that we need on the Hill. So sad to see you go, but really excited for this next stage for what you'll be doing. So
I am as well, and we're in good hands up here. The environment of the legislature is so much different than it was when I first got elected in '06 when it comes to parental choice. And I know we still fight our battles,
Yeah.
but we generally are on the offensive now, where back then we were on the defensive all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I know we'll be running some legislation here really soon, and very much appreciate your support and your sponsorship on bills. And so, yeah, Senator Chairman Bell, I really appreciate your time, appreciate your work up there in Nashville. So, have a good Monday, and we look forward to seeing you around.
Thanks, Sean. Good talking with
All
you.
right.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Chairman Bell. Bye.